So there's traditionally in OW2con a country slot, and I've been given the honor to represent my country because this is the holiday of the civil servants that that actually could have been here as well. I've taken the liberty to make this kind of a fun story, so I hope you like it. It's a rather liberal interpretation of the history of my country and how it relates to open source. So this is our planet. The ocean levels are slowly rising and the temperatures are mainly responsible for this. So we have this thing called marine transgression, i.e. there's floods coming up. There's going to be more sea and less land. Now, if we flash back to the 14th century, then the country where I live, volunteers, becomes the next Atlantis. We're going to go down. Just to give you a situational awareness, the Netherlands is a wetland delta. We're somewhere in the edge of, I always associate it with Asterix, but I know it's Gallic, but we have that thing where we're up in the edge, nobody cares. But sometimes people come by and they occupy us and then they leave again when we threaten to flood the country. So this is where we are. It's a tiny zit on the planet. If you look at the country, at the top there's a separate region called Frisia, and this region also is partially in Germany, but the Frisia used to go all the way up to the beaches, and it used to be fully independent, non-feudal. So there was no owner because it was kind of hard to conquer. The people were kind of stubborn. You could see it as a kind of a mini NATO. So there wasn't a king or some governor that owned it, but everybody would pull together and unite when they were under attack. So it's kind of a fierce enemy, hidden in the swamps and always striking collectively. Frisian is actually still the second country, second language of our country. So people, well, obviously don't know. It's like with many minority languages. And I think the historical consequence of that is that we have kind of a laissez-faire mindset. There's neither an appetite nor much of a structure for big oppression. So pragmatism and tolerance abound, and that leads to diversity and influx of free-thinking people. Because, well, if you're at a safe distance, then you can say nasty things about whether the world is flat or not, or whether certain beliefs are misbeliefs. And speaking truth to power is just safer at non-striking distance. So the Netherlands is kind of a free haven, I would argue. It's where philosophers like René Descartes or Locke or educators like Comenius used to flee and found refuge when they upset some rulers. We also can be a bit blunt because of this, because we don't have this innate groveling thing which you have to have when you're insulting your ruler and your head is cut off. So the Netherlands is very densely populated. It turns out a lot of people needed to get out of a lot of places, and so in fact the Netherlands is the second most densely populated country in Europe. For people that care, Malta is the other one because that's a similar nexus between the East and Africa and Europe. So, and the Netherlands is extremely technology dependent as a result. Only thanks to technology we're able to feed ourselves and others, because in fact we are the second largest food exporter on the planet, and France being number 3, I think you'll appreciate that's quite a feat, because it's again a zit of a country. But even more existentially, if you look at the country, it wouldn't exist without technology. It wouldn't exist without engineering. It wouldn't exist without large-scale grassroots collaboration, because it's partially built into the sea. If you recall, I called it wetlands. The canal houses in Amsterdam are literally built on wooden poles, and that's not amateur wooden poles. There's tens of thousands of them, and these were hammered in as early as the 12th century with dozens of people collaborating to do that. So it's a vast engineering effort, and these things are still up. In some places, these are the famous dancing houses. These used to be standing straight up. Now they're, as you can see, they're all wobbly. But the whole city is built in this way. So it's and without much of the modern technology where you just add a shovel to it, this was all manual and clever engineering. You probably recognize the word dam in Amsterdam, Rotterdam, etc. It's we have and obviously we all recently saw how scary water is and how immensely dangerous and powerful it can be. But it's also an opportunity, and that's, I think everybody recognizes this. So now, as I said, let's flash back to the 14th century. The Dutch are up for a challenge. Let's see if we can really earn the name Pays-Bas or lower countries. We started creating these things called polders, and we have dykes. So these are higher grounds, and with those dikes we can actually make the marshland into agricultural land. And this is not a one-time small thing or so. There's in the Netherlands about 3,000 of them, and they make a huge interdependent cell structure. I mean, this is a map from somewhere in the 19th century where they map out all 3,000 of them. Obviously, we don't need to make new ones anymore, but this was all done during the course of centuries. And at present, about a quarter of the century lies below sea level. It wouldn't be that quarter, actually. I live in the bottom part. We would be dry, but it would obviously be the coastline that would be disappearing, but I didn't want to tilt the country. So this takes a lot of cooperation. And so we actually have a separate government layer just for the water. And it's logical. This is the biggest, most threatening thing that we have in the country. Or rather not in the country, but waiting to come back in. And this transgression is not where the water is flowing back from everywhere, from the icebergs to us. That's a pretty literal thing. So, and this is not just an engineering thing. It also means a lot to the culture. There's this. It gives a whole rise to a whole political model called the polder model, which is like a consensus-driven thing, because you need everybody to collaborate. If one of the 4,000, one of the 3,000 polders does things stupidly, that can actually hollow out and endanger the rest. So you really need this cell structure to operate as a kind of, well, water internet, so to say. And well, my thesis for today is that we can call these infrastructure technology commons. We wouldn't want a single company to own them. We wouldn't want to have a proprietary ownership of dikes. These are common things, and we will live or die by them. They keep the country dry and safe. They are historically maintained first by community effort, and now we've become all professional, and now it's public money that does it. But this will always remain a shared responsibility. It won't go away. And same goes for a lot of the technology that we use. The internet is not going to go away. So we should accept the cost, embrace the cost, because, well, we don't want things to break or we all suffer. So we're not outsourcing that one ever. And why should we do that with any other technologies? And well, just to finalize this, the word Dutch actually means of the common people. So the word commons is pretty close to our heart. Now, if you look at the history of the country, the engineering and the budget to do the engineering actually came from somewhere, and this comes from re-engineering the Silk Route. The Silk Route. The Silk Route, in Dutch is de Zijderoute. So the Silk Road basically ended when the Ottoman Empire rose. And we had, the Han dynasty was trading for, since 300 before Christ, fertily with Europe, and all of a sudden that ended when the Ottomans came, and that's really severed trade. People couldn't bypass this large proprietor, and just a small part of the road was owned by somebody else, and they blocked it, and everybody was lost. And we all had hundreds of years to well, get back, because we couldn't do a full-out attack. The Ottomans were fierce, and just we couldn't own them, just like we can't these days own Apple and Google and Microsoft, because they're just too big to own. So the lesson here is, if you don't own your own infrastructure or your own resources, then basically you're at the mercy of those that do. And I think that translates very well to today. So the Dutch, of course, they were already living in the water. During the Golden Age, there were 5 embarkments where people would stay. 2 of them were lying in the water. People have been living in the water all their life. So they found this neat way around and established the largest trading companies on the planet. They established the first public companies and treated the waterways as an alternative infrastructure. And this started something which, of course, the Dutch called the golden century. Global trade booming, and Amsterdam could afford to grow because it was just so damn useful to everybody else. Unfortunately, and I apologize for the people that were a victim of this generations ago, of course, this also coincided with a wave of colonization and enslavement. So that's it's not just beautiful things that happened. I think all of Europe, when they were cut off from the East, started finding their ways and also occupying grounds in order to make it never happen again. And this is actually what we see now. People are doing rare metal earth excavations everywhere and buying governments and doing all kinds of nasty things just to get these strategic assets. So back to today, because we're here at the technology conference. So let's talk about modern technology, because now it's us that's being colonialized. So a short flashback to the beginning of computer science in the Netherlands. There was a famous computer scientist called Edgar Dijkstra. He did his PhD and published it in 1959, when you could still do a PhD with a title called Communication with an Automatic Computer. And the Association for Computing Machinery has said that no other individual has had a larger influence on the research in principles of the distributed computing than this guy. And he was working at this institute called CWI, which is now called CWI. At the time it was called Mathematisch Centrum. 1982, an employee of CWI launched the EUNet in Paris. And scientists and engineers like Jaap Akkerhuis and Teus Haag and Ted Lindgren and many other people started, well, to build the grassroots computer network. Meanwhile, at the time, of course, there was the OC stack, and this wasn't it. This was just rogue pirates doing something else, and that grew into the European internet. In 1989, that became too big, and NLNet, the place where I work, became a legal entity in order to scale things up. And just for good measure, at the time, the World Wide Web was just still a proposal. They had already been working at it for 7 years. And just to capture the mindset, if you think surfing hypertext is cool, that's because you haven't tried writing it. I mean, this is the mindset that we had, like this, everything is possible, we're gonna just make it. This was a quote from Tim Berners-Lee. So in 1990, and I'm going to go into a short history of what happened to that beautiful head start that we had in 1990. We're the first country to exclusively sign a contract with Microsoft to use Word for Windows and MS-DOS for all of our education. So Bill Gates was just a millionaire back then. He wasn't a billionaire like now. We were the first country. This was a high-level decision. It was noted at the ministry that Apple had better devices, was educationally more advanced, but they wanted to do something good for the world, so they, well, spawned this exclusive contract, and we've suffered ever since. In 1991, a guy called Andrew Tannenbaum got a message from a student called Linus Torvalds if he could take the code of Minix and make it free software. He worked at the Free University, so that sounded logical, but he got a no, and so he started Linux. In 1997, just short period afterwards, NLNet decided to call it quits in being having a company. They sold the company underneath and became a charity and gave the proceeds to the internet. 25 years ago, IPv6 is published, so finally we solve all the problems of IPv4. And then I think what a watershed moment was in the Netherlands, or a watershed, is the beginning of the swamp trying to crawl back. Politics started getting aware of how important software was, and a group of parliamentarians unanimously passed this motion that we should really use open standards in the public sector, and that the supply side of software is really, really too concentrated, and their society is missing out on the important things of software. And that they should first use open standards, and second, stimulate the public sector to use open source, because they saw there's a lot of volume there. And so the government started pumping out programs, and the first program was called Open Standards and Open Source Software. The second one was called Open Source as part of the software strategy, i.e. both times OSOS. And this would be what I think these days might call an OSPO. It wasn't called that because it wasn't there. And in 2007, hooray, OW2 was founded. In 2008, 2011, there was a successor program to these first programs that I mentioned, which was kind of more ambitious, this action plan. They actually started with this motto of saying, comply or explain, and then commit. So that means you shall use open source, or you shall explain why you're not using open source, and then commit when you will be using open source. That sounded like a really good plan. They were really well informed when they started that. Unfortunately, politics then cut off the last bit, so you could just explain and be done with it. And soon the cabinet fell. Another government didn't have as much gusto in doing the same. And so while there were very promising starts, like for instance, lots of governments signed this manifesto to become supplier independent, to have more transparency, more interoperability, to have digital sustainability. And it didn't really happen. I think this happened in a number of countries. It was a big deception for the people involved. One forgotten treasure from that time is that FOSS can be an instant incumbent. So one of the great finds that the program had was that they did a study, a legal study, and they found that obviously there's lots of protections in place for making sure there's no shortcuts to specific vendors getting corrupt deals. And there's also this protection mechanism where proprietary solutions, once you're using them, are very hard to kill off, because you can just prolong support on them because you're depending on them, so you can't tender off the whole thing. And what they found out was that you can just download a bit of software, put it on one single machine, use it for 5 minutes, and now you're incumbent. And this is there's a fine legal study behind it, and I warmly encourage you, if you're not if you're not taking that strategy, to onboard that, because that puts free and open source software at least somewhat on par with incumbent software vendors. So, Q2020. COVID, the COVID pandemic, and the Dutch government has this really good success with FOSS, actually just operationally. And at the same time, they run into a brick wall with big tech, because big tech isn't moving a single centimeter, and it's hard to get a reach off, while they themselves are able to harness the energy of the open source community and make very good progress. And this really made the jump from policy to operations, and then from operations back to policy. So in 2022, we have a new state secretary, Alexandra van Huffelen, and well, this is a minister for digitalization. She's publicly stated she wants the IT of government to grow to 100% open source, and she means it. I mean, I've talked to her, and she's very dedicated and smart, and I think this is something that they really want to push for. And so finally, we get our own official OSPO, because now the term exists, so now we can have one. And recently, the state secretary, or the minister, said, "I want a digitized world that is inclusive, humane, and fair. A digital economy that is innovative, open, entrepreneurial, resilient, and safe." I mean, this could have been written by somebody from the European Commission. So now we're back up to speed with FOSS policy in Dutch government. Meanwhile, obviously, all the politics happened, but the economy hasn't been the same. I mean, a lot of things happen. Just like the ocean is now eating the land, proprietary software and serverless services are really completely flooding the economy and collapsing some of the old economy, dragging everything along, as we've seen, while creating huge dependencies. And it's not just the economy, it's actually a lot of things. So 2013, last week Friday, 10 years ago, publication of the first node of revelations. We now see that it's a tactical weapon. In 2018, Tim Berners-Lee gave the Turing lecture, the most prestigious prize in computing. And he stated, we've gone from utopia to dystopia. And I mean, when the guy who invents the web says that the platform has become a large-scale emergent phenomenon which is anti-human, when you know how positive Tim Berners-Lee is, that's a pretty damning observation. So here we are. One company designing phones and laptops is now worth more than all of companies of the London Stock Exchange. I mean, and they're not making phones, right? They're just commissioning them to another country to make them, and still they're worth more. So that is, to me, well, kind of doesn't feel very right. But it's new reality. So as long as we depend on proprietary software and proprietary services, others own the road to profit, and they own us. I was at the Ministry of Economic Affairs last week, and they stated a figure, and I can't replicate it correctly, but they stated something like the European role in IT was 23% global. We own 23% of all the profits in IT, and now it's 10% in a decade. And well, governments are going to be held back for all the reasons they're held back. We saw this in the Netherlands. Even if you have over 2 decades of well-meaning politicians and right and well-informed politicians, there's still many reasons they're held back. So you may ask, why are you standing here, and what have you folks been doing on your watch? Well, what can a little pragmatic foundation do? Well, it turns out there's a lot of people that understand how deeply problematic actually the whole situation is, and how these new global superpowers, they're not kings anymore. They're a Mountain View or one infinite loop somewhere in Silicon Valley. But there's digital wetlands, and I would call open source the digital wetlands. We have a shitload of it, billions of lines of code, but we haven't been driven into the cloud just yet. We still have some soggy ground under our feet, and we can nurture and build upon it. Our feet are kind of wet. Many people have to, for some reason or another, compromise on using some proprietary technologies. I don't, but many do. But just as a reminder, 99.9% of the planet does not work for big tech. And there's plenty of engineering talent that can outthink Silicon Valley. And these people just need food and shelter, like they did back in when they fled to the Netherlands in the 16th and 17th century. All they need is a joint vision. The J-Shelter project is kind of nice because it's a project that we're funding from the Free Software Foundation to help you not be fingerprinted in your browser. But so this is the strategic digital commons that Jean-Luc also mentioned. We have quite a lot of layers where projects need to be and are being funded. And this goes from the low-level hardware and how to make that hard, to verify how the hardware is actually the hardware that you commissioned, all the way up to high-level services and data. You'll be able to look up the slides, so I won't repeat them all because I think I'm running late. But so yet another alternate timeline. In 2016, the European Commission starts bootstrapping the Next Generation Internet Initiative. In 2018, they published this study where they lay down the NGI vision, which I think is a pretty good call to action for the huddled masses getting up in the wetlands. And together we've been working like mad to offer emergency food and lodging to the people that are in camp alternate. So as a small foundation, you do what you're good at, and what we do is grant making. And we have many projects, as Jean-Luc indicated. We have many projects. These are just the ActivityPub projects, and you'll see about 25 of them, ranging from Mastodon and PeerTube to GoToSocial, Funkwheel from France, Flarum, ActivityPods is also from France, PixelFed. These are all valid and solid attempts at carving out a niche to fight a certain form of dominance. And well, the reason for me to be here is because we're always looking on the lookout for new exciting projects. So maybe there's the next René Descartes among you. So it's very simple. If you want to help out Polder the digital wetlands, just go to this website, make a proposal. I think you can do it in less than an hour. It's a one single form. It's pretty simple. Just a few questions. If you want, you can apply anonymously, and we will just review it and get back to you with questions if it makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, we like Jean-Luc said, it's a selective program. It's very competitive. We can't take everything on board, but if you have a good plan, we're not going to let you go. And it's also, we're poor compared to Silicon Valley. I think there's well, I was recently talking to somebody, and his friend was earning 1.8 million euro a year. We're not going to offer that. It's a cost-based mechanism. We give you food and shelter, and you can do awesome stuff with very inspiring people close by, and we can create a lot of synergy. And we're looking for real-world impact. There's a goddamn sea out there. It's taking over Europe. Depending on how fatalistic you are, it's a dire situation or it's a big opportunity. Either way, we want practical solutions to actual problems and fill actual gaps. So we don't pay for operational costs, we don't pay for marketing, we don't pay for legal fees, we don't pay for profit, but we do pay for scientific research, open source software, open source hardware, all kinds of validation, support actions, formal proofs, documentation, standardization activities, usability, packaging, developer technical community events, all kinds of things which we think are relevant. What do you get in return? Low to no bureaucracy. There's no need for reporting. You just go and live somewhere and do good things, and do what you promised that you could do, and then send us a link to your results. So, and we will make donations directly to individuals and organizations. So you don't need to be a full-blown entity. You don't need to know all the contributors up front. You can just get started and work with people. And it's actually so lightweight that if you have a cozy, cushy, wonderful job, but you also feel that you need to leave a legacy because you found out this one thing that can save the internet in your tiny niche of knowledge, you can come to us and say, I'll take one day off a week. And if we would do 100,000 euro grants, you wouldn't do that because then you'd like have to recruit 5 people or at least have a team ready to do it. Whilst with small projects, you can actually just, well, go ahead and do it. When new call every 2 months, next deadline is August 1st, spread the word. And I mean, from our perspective, it's pretty simple. The current situation is, I think, pretty dire, but tomorrow is a new day. And today we create the internet of tomorrow. The late Arjen Kamphuis told me during the times of the Nederland Open in Verbinding era that his favorite quote was from Napoleon. That apparently Napoleon, I don't know if it's apocryph or real, but apparently Napoleon made a walk with some of his lieutenants and said, you know, we should really have trees. I want you to start planting trees tomorrow because the soldiers, when they're marching, they should have shadow because it's really so hot here. And so the lieutenant's like, Napoleon, you know that it takes decades to grow a tree. Well, okay, then you need to start now. So there's, I mean, it's a clear situation. The message is we need to get our hands dirty and move forward, because if the cloud takes us over, if proprietary remains and it's now overgrowing all of the economy and taking it over, we won't have much life and much economy left. So yeah, go here for more info and obligatory. Thank you.